10 years now, but most of us will still remember a passenger airliner with 155 people on board. Took off from LaGuardia Airport, New York. Takeoff was uneventful. The plane headed north and west. When at about 3,000 feet, lost power in both of its engines. And the pilot, masterfully, heroically, skillfully, I think of Tom Salter here, executed an almost 180-degree turn, missed the George Washington Bridge, and landed the plane perfectly in the Hudson River. All on board survived. Of course, after the talk of the pilot's miracle and the crew's inspired work and the ferry and the Coast Guard's grand efforts in getting everybody off the floating plane, came the question, what happened? What caused it? The answer, as most of you remember, was geese. Canadian geese flying, a flock of them flying at about 3,000 feet, sucked into the engine. And in the subsequent reporting, and I looked at all of it, the only talk I heard about the geese were ideas on how to eliminate them in violent and destructive ways from that area. And when I heard that, it reminded me of how grateful I am for the Christian tradition, the ancient one, of which I am a part and which I identify, Celtic Christianity, and for a church like Apostles and people like Marshall Lewis and all of you who serve working for the Earth Angels. A church so open to hearing and learning about Celtic Christian theology and spirituality, a tradition which engenders sheer amazement at the human arrogance which villainizes animals as they course through their ancient pathways in the sky. For sorrow at the suffering of animals due to human chauvinism. And so, inspiration came to write this sermon, which celebrates the oneness that we have with all creation, especially thinking today of the animals. Verses from Psalm 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord, my God, you are very great. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills, giving drink to every wild animal. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. By the streams, the birds of the air have their habitation. They sing up among the branches. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the cattle and plants for people to use to bring forth food from the earth. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that God planted. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has its home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the conies. O Lord, how manifold are your works in wisdom that you have made all of these. The earth is full of your creatures, and the great whale that you formed to sport in it. Yonder is the sea, great and wide. Creeping things innumerable are there, living things both small and great. And there go the ships, and the great whale that you formed to play with. Let us pray. Gracious God, be with your servants today and your servant, that words heard and words spoken would be found well-pleasing in your sight, you who are our rock, our strength, and our place. Amen. The two divers in their scuba gear dropped backward off the inflatable boat in the Pacific Ocean, about 20 miles out from San Francisco Harbor. Cautiously, they swam toward the humpback whale, lying weak and exhausted in the waves. The water was 53 degrees. It was dark and frothy like a dark beer. A huge flipper, 8 or 9 feet long, the pectoral fin rose up a yard away from the divers. One slap could kill a person. The whale was 50 feet long and weighed 50 tons. Thick nylon crab trap ropes, called blue steel because of their strength, wound around the fin and through the whale's mouth and over her head. In some spots, the lines sliced so deeply that they disappeared into the animal's flesh. Left like this, she would die. As the two divers, Jim and Tim, swam to investigate, small chunks of white blubber like scattered popcorn suspended all around in the water gouged from the whale's body. Swimming further, Jim and Tim saw that her tail was wrapped with about 20 ropes, connected to at least a dozen 100-pound crab traps. They were dragging her tail down at a 90-degree angle. She was hogtied and using all of her strength to keep her blowhole above water. It seemed absolutely helpless, but the two divers had to try. They began cutting and sawing on the myriad ropes. The whale, instead of thrashing with her fin, stopped moving. Even when they cut her flipper free, she did not move it, but remained calm and still. When the two divers surfaced to get some more equipment, Tim said, "I think she knows that we're trying to help her." Back down they went. The blue ropes ran over her head, through her mouth like a gag. In her fierce struggling, the ropes had sliced through the corners of her mouth. Tim severed piece by piece of the rope, and then, kind of like pulling out giant dental floss, tugged with all of his strength to remove them. He thought, this has got to be frightening to her, and painful. But amazingly, the creature remains calm. Tim had another thought as he looked at his hand wedged under one of the cables. If she dies suddenly, with my hand wedged in, she'll take me down. But on he went, his fins resting on her body for leverage as he pulled and yanked and yanked. In utter stillness she lay, as Tim and she floated eye to eye, her eye as big as a dinner plate, watching him as he labored to save her. Jim was working on her tail, cutting the ropes one by one, and each time a trap fell away, the whale eased her tail up slightly, showing that the loss of weight was making a difference. When he got to the last few, they were so deeply embedded that he knew the only way to remove them was to use his knife and to have to cut into her. Not knowing how she would react, he pierced her and began to cut, and still she remained calm. Finally, the last one was out, and Jim watched as the last trap spiraled down into the darkness. The two divers surfaced, the whale still nearby. She was free now. They began to cheer, "Woohoo! Woohoo! She's free!" Other crew members on the boat joined in the shouting, and two of them jumped in to help celebrate. Suddenly, the whale dove. "Where'd she go?" Jim called out. Their face masks still on, they looked down into the depths. And to their shock, the giant animal was coming up from below, very fast, and straight at them. Had she finally lost it? Had her suffering engulfed her in rage? Now it was the divers' lives, truly, that were in peril. But suddenly, a few feet from Jim's chest, she stopped. Then she nudged him gently, turned away, and began to swim in a circle around the divers. And then, almost in slow motion, one after the other, the giant creature swam to each person and made the gentlest of contact, a brush. The divers could only describe it as a ritual of thanksgiving, of joy, of oneness. And when finally she swam away, the salt burning the diver's eyes was not from the ocean. For some of us, that story strikes a resonance deeply, connects with our lives. Many of us have, or do now, have pets. And we recognize in that story our experience that there is something mystical about animals that we just can't quite explain. We could tell our own story, I'm sure, if we sat around in a circle, about some deep connection of communication, of oneness between ourselves and an animal. But for others of us, these thoughts or feelings of possible spiritual and mystical and unexplainable connection with animals may seem a little on the sentimental side, not real. The church's teaching over the last 1,000 years has certainly contributed to that last belief, if not being the primary cause of this understanding, of the doubting of the spirituality of animals. Without taking the time to go into great detail of the church's teaching, allow me to do an extremely brief summary. According to the ancient church, not the ancient church, but the church of more recent times, paradise on earth was lost at the very beginning in Eden. So both earth and all her wonders and creatures have been ignored in the drive to go to heaven and to regain paradise. Thankfully, the ancient tradition of Celtic Christianity, which dates to the very earliest church, has remained. In Celtic Christian teaching and spirituality, there are not one scripture. There are two scriptures that are authoritative in our lives. There is the written one, the Bible, and of equal importance to Celts, there is the created order of the universe. Creation is viewed as a theophany, from the Greek theos for God and phanos for showing, a God showing. A showing of God, a disclosure of God in creation, of the heart of God's being. Our written scripture puts it this way in our other scripture that I have in the bulletin. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. All things, as we said with the children, all things were made through the Word, and without the Word, not one thing was made. Talking about the Christ here, we're made by the Christ. Christ is in us and in all of creation, and without that, nothing would exist. How to understand this familiar verse? Well, Philip Newell is an author and Celtic scholar. He puts it this way. It is not as if the elements of the universe are fashioned out of a neutral substance. The matter of life comes forth directly from the womb of God. Christ is in us. Christ is in the animals. This word, the cosmic Christ that comes to us, that is in us, that is us, in all things, is the, quote, original utterance of God. That was a phrase used by Irenaeus, the early Christian teacher. How early? Irenaeus was only one teacher removed from the gospel writer John. The original utterance of God is creation. Christ is then the original primal scream, God giving birth to all of us. Christ is the oneness from which we all came. And Celtic Christianity teaches that in the animals, we are able to see, if we take the care to look, this connection so clearly. Think of it for a moment. Do not animals exhibit this ancient and primal connection to their beginnings, to the rhythm of the earth? The animals know things, do they not, that we cannot know? We do not know. Consider the migrating ones. The geese, which we mentioned, the salmon, the monarch butterflies, all who, without the benefit of an iPhone, but in possession of a superior navigational system, know where their beginnings are. Or the wolf, at full moon, calling back to the womb from which she came. Or I wonder if you remember the stories that came to us about the animals of Indonesia in 2004 after the great tsunami, who on a sunny day, a calm day, a perfect day to be on the beach, for no apparent reason that people could see, animals by the hordes fled the coastlines up into the higher grounds around this beach. Why? To escape the unseen destruction that was coming. Someone has said that if we honor the animals as companions and equals, many might have been saved that day simply by observing what the creatures were doing. They are our teachers. They point us to the wisdom that is beyond intellect. But that does reside in our own spirits and in our own knowing when we stop to listen. So, no more words of explanation. This has been a sermon with several big stories, and I'm finishing with another one. I ask you, though, to be careful as you listen to this story, and I'd like to ask that you observe yourself. If there is any inner knowing that comes to you in this story, any homecoming, let's say, that rises up in you as you hear this story. It is from Philip Newell, who I've just mentioned. During our years on Iona, we had a dog named Joe. In Gaelic, that meant spark of life. And he was exactly that. He was a spark from the heart of life. Joe was a border collie, and he was true to his deepest instincts. The whole of his life, he lived and breathed to round up. And if he was not allowed to round up sheep, he would try to round up children, or tractors, or birds, or anything that he could. His favorite day of the week at Iona was Wednesday, Pilgrimage Day, when sometimes up to 100 people would walk the 7-mile route around the island as a time to reflect on the journey of our lives and the world, together praying for peace. Joe was excited from the beginning of the day. He knew it was Wednesday, long before I took the shepherd crook in my hand to lead the walk. He was in an ecstasy of delight, rounding up pilgrims all day, at times looking almost berserk with joy as he circled endlessly in the heather. But his was not a frenetic running, aimless. His instinct was fine-tuned. It had a purpose. It had a goal. His goal? To hold those people together. So as we approached the center of the island, his energy abated. He quieted at his work till we were all in the circle, and then Joe would lie down and go to sleep. His work done. Joe's deepest instinct was to bring us into unity. There is a longing within all creation to form a circle again, friends, to come home. It is a sacred longing for the earth and all of her creatures, as it is for us. Newell continues. There came a time when Joe could no longer follow his instinct. It was the year after our son Brendan became gravely ill. It was as if Joe had taken the illness and the pain into himself, and he developed a cancer. As I carried him up our stair one evening, his eyes were so sad that I began to weep. How could this one, who had lived to round us up, leave us now when we were falling apart? The vet said it was time. Cameron, our 6-year-old, and I took Joe. The vet explained to us she would give Joe a shot, and 20 seconds later, he would breathe one last breath. The table was the same level as Cameron's head. He leaned forward towards Joe as close as he could get. Their faces were inches apart. Cameron was the last thing that Joe saw. I said a prayer. We left in silence. As we walked home, after a bit, Cameron said, "Daddy, I have a sore throat." "Why do you think you have a sore throat, Cameron?" He said, "I think it's because I'm wanting to cry." And I said, "I also have a sore throat, Cameron." And we cried. The animals know the rhythm of the earth. The animals have not forgotten. They have not forgotten, as we do, the unity of which we are all a part. So in the Celtic world, animals are messengers in whom we are all one. We hunger for this unity, this oneness, never more in my lifetime than we are now as a people. Our own instincts, like the animals, call us to oneness. And the animals show us we will be most deeply fed in our hunger when we find ways to be together. For it is together that we will hear most clearly that sacred rhythm. And it is when we are in a circle again that our work will be done. Apostles, here's to the animals and the way they teach us to circle up and to come home again. And may this community continue to be that for you